Just about everything we do on this site is done better, quicker or easier by using our radio communication system.
Go ahead, Victor Base.
We had a report of small flange fire on berth 1. If you could respond,
It might be something we take largely for granted, but imagine for a minute what it would be like without radios.
It would be very difficult because you'll have no communication and everything would be very slow in happening.
Well, there would be no communication between myself and my panel controller, and we would both be working in the dark.
It would be slower and more frustrating because the communication would be slower.
Yeah. Pretty impossible, whereas the trains are now nearly a quarter of a mile long and signals are not really viable nowadays. You can't see far enough, especially if it's foggy.
Elf track 1 to control.
The actual running of the jetty would be an impossibility. It is the only way we've got instant communications with people. If we had to shout to people, you'd be hoarse within an hour, the jetty being 3/4 of a mile wide.
Can we have the booster pump in now, please, Jim? Over.
Okay, Victor 2, message received. I should pass that on out.
The use of radios here at ELF is central to our operating philosophy. It's not a luxury, it's not a toy, but it's an essential tool like any other on site. And like any other tool, there is a right way and a wrong way to use it. It's important that all radio users learn the same radio procedure. Firstly, to get the best out of our system, and secondly, because correct radio procedures are a condition of our license from the Department of the Environment. Hopefully, this short video will give you an insight into how your radio system works, how to use your radio properly, how to look after the equipment, and how to use your radio in an emergency. After all, you never know when you really need it.
The ELF refinery use a Motorola communication system, and the most common hand portable radios you will come across are the Motorola MX1000 and the GP300. Though they are of slightly different design, both operate in basically the same way. So to simplify things, we'll use the MX1000 throughout this training video. Our radios are rugged, reliable and simple to use. But before we go into their operating method, let's take a quick look at the system's operating principles. Alan England supplies and maintains our radio system.
The Motorola radio system used on ELF is called a dedicated system. Each user group, such as Process South, North, Rail, etc., use their own dedicated channels, which can be accessed from the radio using the multi-channel switch on top. That means that each user can actually turn to any of the other user groups if they wish. The system used at ELF, dedicated system, is superior to the trunk systems as used on some of the other refineries because the access time is quicker. We don't have to wait for setup times like on trunk systems. This gives us a greater degree of flexibility. That means that any radio can access any of the radio channels.
So, how does the system work?
When you press the talk button on your lapel mic or on the handset, the radio sends a signal to the receiver like this one, which then opens up a channel for you. This doesn't happen instantly. It takes a second or two to set up. So it's worth remembering that if you start talking as soon as you press the button, the first few seconds of your message will be cut off.
I'm dropping the pre-wash caustic now, Steve.
The signal is passed to the repeater and then goes two ways. One way feeds the signal back to the appropriate aerial, where it is transmitted to the user in the field and picked up by his radio. The second sends the signal by cable to the appropriate base station for that channel. In this case, it's the main control room. Then routes it to the panel operator's console unit.
Okay, he's making...
This means that unlike some systems that transmit and receive from set to set, users will always receive the strongest possible signal regardless of where they are on the refinery.
ELF Uniform 19 to base, come in right.
ELF Uniform base to you. When a panel man responds to the caller in the field, the signal goes back to the base station where it's repeated and routed to its appropriate aerial and transmitted to the user.
ELF Uniform base to Uniform
And lastly, one important thing to remember about the system used on ELF is that each channel will sustain only one conversation at a time. In other words, if someone else is using that channel, wait until they've finished before you transmit on it.
As we said earlier, each user group has its own channel. Channel 1 is used by Southside Process. Channel 2 is used by the Tank Farm and Jetty and doubles as the emergency channel. Channel 3 is used by Process North. Channel 4 is for rail loading only. And Channel 5 is the fire and security channel and can only be accessed by fire and security radios. All other channels can be selected by using the rotary switch on the top of the set.
I'm switching from channel 3 to channel 2.
If you do have to change channels for any reason, remember to switch back to your designated channel when you have finished. The portable radio you are issued with is made up of 3 components working together. 1. The transmitter receiver. 2. The rechargeable battery. And 3. The remote or lapel microphone. Together, they make up a tough, hard-wearing unit ideally suited for refinery life. But they are not indestructible. They need to be treated with care and respect if you want to get the most out of them. So, 1. Check your radio before use for signs of damage. A loose or broken casing or an exposed part in a battery could cause a spark, and in a refinery, that could be dangerous. 2. Protect your radio from damage. Use the pouch or belt clip to secure it firmly, or if your overalls have a radio pocket, use that to stow it safely. 3. Protect your radio from rain. Although some of our radios are submersible, experience shows that repeated wetting shorten their life and often adversely affect transmission quality. And whilst we're on the subject of radios and water, here's a little-known fact about lapel mics.
The lapel mics have small louvers in the front case to allow the sound waves to pass through to the waterproof membrane which is behind, which is that little piece in there. The louvers are designed to throw off any moisture which might fall on them and which would otherwise block the speaker and muffle any transmitted sound. This works well, providing the mic is kept in an upright position. I've seen microphones worn on the neck like this, which would allow any moisture or rain to penetrate, which would then stop any sound waves passing through. I think the bottom line really is put the microphone in this position.
The batteries we provide are designed to last around 12 hours, but their life expectancy depends on several variable factors, like the amount of use they get and how often and how well they are charged. Constant use will drain the battery a lot quicker than if it is used simply to receive incoming calls. So it's a good rule to keep talk time to a minimum. Another good rule is to change your battery regularly. Make it a habit to pick up a freshly charged battery at the start of your work period. Then you know it won't let you down when you most need it. Battery chargers can be found in all control rooms, in some team leaders' offices, in the jetty office, and at the main gate. Get to know where your nearest charger is. Changing a battery is simple. Release the battery from the handset and place it in a vacant charger slot. It'll only go in one way. Remove a fully charged battery, indicated by a green light, and slide it back into the handset. A red light here indicates that the battery is still charging. A flashing red light means that there is a fault and the battery should not be used. If you find a faulty battery, remove it and mark it up so that it cannot be used inadvertently. Do not bin a faulty battery. They have to be disposed of correctly. When you've changed your battery, make a test call to check that it is working.
Radio check, please.
Now we know how the system works and how to take care of our radios, let's have a look at radios in use. The radio system here is licensed by the Department of the Environment, The rules covering its use are outlined in this publication and are enforceable by law. The DOE have the right to intercept our radio transmissions, and misuse of the system can result in prosecution and fines, and in extreme cases can result in our license being withdrawn. Remember, even bad language on the air can constitute misuse. It's vital, therefore, that all radio users comply with our license conditions at all times. So, what is the proper way to use a radio? Firstly, only use the radio if you really need to. Don't clutter the airways with unnecessary chatter. Secondly, a radio message should be brief and concise. It should consist of the sender's identity, the receiver's identity, the message, and an end sign. So, what is your identity? On the ELF refinery, we have been allocated call signs to identify work groups, and then we have given numbers to work areas to narrow it down further. So, anyone issued with a radio as part of their job will assume the identity that goes with the job. Process operations on the north side use the call sign ELF Pro, followed by the number of the area they're working on. For example, a CAT operator would be ELF Pro 4. Process operations south side use the call sign ELF Uniform, again followed by the number of the area on which they are working. Off-sites, that is the tank farm, jetty and road loading stand, use the call sign ELF Tank, followed by the number of the area they are working on. Rail loading use the call sign ELF Track, and fire and security respond to ELF Victor. In each case, the base station is known as control or base. Process control is ELF Pro Control, security is ELF Victor Control, etc.
ELF Victor Base, ELF Victor 2. Come in, Chris, over.
Let's look at good radio practice. Firstly, if other users are on the air, wait for a break in transmission before starting your message. Now, press the talk button firmly and keep it pressed whilst you talk. Keep the microphone between 2 and 4 inches from your mouth. Wait at least 2 seconds to ensure connection before speaking. Identify yourself with your call sign and number and say who you are calling.
ELF Pro 3 to base, come in, Steve.
Release the talk button and wait for a response. Now pass your message clearly and concisely, ending with the word over if you're expecting a reply,
Come in, Chris, over.
or out if you're not.
Thank you, out.
It might be necessary to move to a quieter spot if you're in an area of high noise.
Yes, that's about 50%, that's exactly what we got here.
Radios without lapel mics are not recommended for outside use, and they should only be considered as a last resort. And used like this, they're no use at all.
I'm sorry, you'll have to say that again, please.
If you're having trouble being understood, then the phonetic alphabet may come in handy. You can use phonetics to make sure that the important part of your message is getting through. You can pick up a copy of the phonetic alphabet from the gatehouse security technician. An emergency in a place like a refinery can have serious and far-reaching effects on people and the environment. The key to preventing an emergency becoming a disaster is swift corrective intervention, and our radio system is central to our emergency response plan.
Steve, I'd be on channel 2.
So, what's different in an emergency? In an emergency, fire response personnel, that is, fire squad members and supervisors given incident control duties, would switch their radios to channel 2 for the duration of the incident. This becomes the incident control channel and leaves all other channels free for essential work.
Incident control, come in, Peter, please. I need an ambulance driver immediately.
Okay.
Only fire response personnel must switch to channel 2. All others stay on their own channels.
Health Rear Control, Alpha Victor Base, over.
Alpha Victor 1 to base, go ahead, over.
Victor 1 to Victor Base, could you return to the main gate, please? Over.
Alpha Victor 1 to base, your message received and understood. Out. Remember, your radio is an essential piece of your equipment. Use it with care and use it correctly. You never know when you may need it.